Alright, here's the catch. This game has all the right ingredients to be an unforgettable VR adventure. A rich atmospheric setting, a story that gets more intriguing the deeper you go, and puzzles that keep your brain juices flowing. Despite these strengths though, it's the mechanics that end up standing in the way of an otherwise great experience. I've also heard through the grapevine that this game runs pretty poorly on PlayStation. Now, to be fair, the developers recently rolled out an update that ironed out a few rough edges, so the game I'm reviewing today isn't the same as its launch version. Some of the biggest issues have been somewhat addressed. Still, if you're planning on diving in, be prepared. It's the game's core mechanics that may determine if you walk away immersed or frustrated. But we'll get into that soon. First, let's start with the graphics. And honestly, while they're not jaw-dropping at high settings, they're not terrible by any stretch. There are moments where you'll run into noticeably low-resolution textures, think like walls or certain objects that look blurry up close. Seriously though, this doesn't drag down the experience much. The game manages to keep you in the moment thanks to an overall aesthetic that fits really well with an atmosphere you'd expect from a game set in Chernobyl. Where things get awkward though is how Chernobyl again plays with lighting, or at least that's what I would say if I hadn't remembered while writing this script that I had a flashlight in my inventory the entire time. Instead of just fading to black or having you stare at a loading screen, the whole environment shifts into this green wireframe. It then follows up with a wall of what I assume are real pictures surrounding the Chernobyl event. It really is the simple things that keep you immersed. This is well done. Now let's get into the audio, which brings some unique elements of Chernobyl again. Right off the bat, I've got to give credit for the Geiger counter sounds in the options menu. Adjusting the settings makes click and static that really sound like you're handling some old radiation detecting equipment. Again, it really is the small things that add layers of immersion, and the voice acting, while not groundbreaking, is convincing enough.
So, how do I find this time corruptor?
I'll explain in a moment. First, we need to go over the functionality of your equipment. I need to be sure you're up to speed.
The actors bring enough emotion to convey the storyline and keep you engaged without feeling overly dramatic or stiff. It's not on the level of a AAA game, but it's good enough to keep you grounded in the experience. However, certain sound effects are annoying. Take this beeping antenna for instance.
Find the correct frequency. To the best of my knowledge, it should be somewhere in the safe house.
I was moving this antenna to solve a puzzle and the resulting noise was so loud and repetitive that it ended up giving me a headache. Unfortunately, that loud beep was sending out a signal for me to take a break because it flatlined my immersion in the moment. It's a bit surprising that these volume issues weren't addressed in the recent update, but here's hoping it's something that gets fine-tuned very soon. Aside from that, the narrated hint system also had its quirks. Someone involved in your mission will chime in to help you if you're struggling.
Whenever I pull a wire from one row, the colors in the opposite row move one position to the right.
But it's so persistent that it almost becomes an obstacle in itself, especially when you're hearing the same line for the 10th time in a row. If you take too long on a puzzle, these hints will come at you repeatedly, and in my case, it made it harder to focus because it kept breaking my concentration. I like solving difficult puzzles myself, and this was especially annoying when trying to work things out on my own. Where things start to look up again though is the theme of this game. If you're expecting Chernobyl Again to lean into horror elements, you'll get a little of that. You will be thrown a jump scare from time to time, and the environments in this game are naturally pretty creepy. But this game's primary goal isn't to scare you. It's a story-driven atmospheric puzzle adventure that leans heavily on problem solving rather than jump scares. And that's okay because the game puts off an almost haunting vibe without diving too deep into horror territory. You play as Olena, an agent from a covert organization equipped with time-traveling technology. Right from the start, you're thrown into Chernobyl on a high-stakes mission. You're supposed to stop a suspicious individual from disrupting the timeline by messing with history. The narrative itself, combined with this unique time travel angle, makes for a surprisingly engaging adventure from the start. There is a deeper layer of storytelling here that I won't spoil because you might be planning on trying this game out for yourself. But the game hints at larger motivations and secrets that keep you curious about Olena's journey and the organization she works for.
Listen carefully, Olena. I have information about your parents.
My parents? Who is this?
These subtle underlying vibes do add an extra dimension to the game, making it feel like more than just a straightforward puzzle-solving experience. And speaking of puzzles, that brings us to the mechanics. The core of the game is built around clever puzzles that genuinely make you think. There's no doubt about that. The problem is that the controls that bring these puzzles to life are far from seamless, and they end up being a major barrier to really enjoying the game. One of the biggest issues starts from the beginning of the game with how your hands are calibrated. They are noticeably off angle, making basic actions like using the watch-based inventory system awkward and uncomfortable. There's no way to recalibrate or fix this alignment either, which seems like an odd oversight for a game that depends on precise interactions. Outside looking in, this might sound minor, but when you're constantly reaching for your watch and struggling to line it up, it can really start to break your focus. The interactions themselves are also a hit or miss. Many of the items you need to manipulate feel like they weren't designed with the human experience in mind, almost as if the developers didn't take the natural limitations of our joints into account. For instance, I found a safe with a combination code, a classic puzzle moment. But actually inputting the code took way longer than it should have, thanks to the uncooperative controls that made the entire experience feel like a chore. What makes these clunky mechanics even more frustrating is the contrast between the puzzles themselves, which are actually pretty well designed. The puzzles are thoughtful and engaging, giving you that satisfying aha moment. Well, that is until you start wrestling with the controls. Metaphorically speaking, the result is an art piece that has the most beautiful colors you'd find on an art piece, but the artistic creativity is sold separately. It is worth mentioning that the developers recently rolled out an update that was supposed to improve some of these issues. But as of the time of this review, the mechanics are still rough around the edges. Here's hoping the next update can bring the controls up to par with the game's clever puzzle design. Speaking of clever designs, the option menu is pretty easy to navigate. You'll find options like vignettes to help with motion sickness, as well as the choice to play seated or standing, giving you the ability to really custom fit your experience. The menu design itself feels solid too. It's intuitive and easy to navigate too, which is a breath of fresh air given the issues with some of the other controls. It's not the most immersive way of adjusting settings, but it's straightforward to tweak settings on the fly without getting pulled out of the game's atmosphere. That said, I did find myself wishing for the ability to turn off these repetitive hints that pop up during puzzles. While I get the hints are meant to guide you if you're stuck, they can quickly turn into an annoyance when they interrupt your focus on solving a puzzle. An option to silence these would have gone a long way in keeping the experience immersive. That and hand calibration, because the hands just felt plain off, but overall Chernobyl Again covers the basics well. And now that we've broken down the main elements, how does Chernobyl Again fare when it comes to full immersion? Well, that's complicated. The game brings you into a hauntingly atmospheric world with a strong story premise and cleverly crafted puzzles, and on paper that should be enough to pull you in. But when you're actually in the headset, those immersion-breaking mechanics and control issues start to weigh down the experience. Graphics gets a 4 out of 6 because the game doesn't look bad on high settings and runs pretty smooth. Audio gets a 3 out of 6. While this game has good narration, problems like headache-inducing sounds is a serious problem that needs to be addressed. Theme gets a 5 out of 6 because everything from the story to the puzzle designs themselves feel immersively implemented. Mechanics gets a 2 out of 6. The controls and mechanics make sense for the most part, but they just don't feel as natural as they should. And options gets a 4 out of 6 because all of the expected settings are here. The ability to calibrate your hands or adjust the audio of the hints would have been appreciated though. All in all, one of the game's strongest points is the atmosphere. Chernobyl's eerie setting is captured with an impressive attention to detail, and the story adds a sense of urgency that makes you feel like you're genuinely on a mission to prevent history from unraveling. At least after you factor out standing in an empty control room for an hour and playing with colors like a 3-year-old. That said, this game has earned an overall immersion score of 3 out of 6. The mechanics are the biggest thing holding this game back, but who knows, maybe they'll release an update soon. Until they do though, check out some of my other reviews while you're hitting the like button and subscribing for more VR content. Until next time, stay immersed.